I'm Sharon Walker with the Pacifica Historical Society. Our show, Footprints of Pacifica, each week explores the lore and the lure of this lovely town Pacifica, its character and its characters. Our guest today is Andrew Leone. He is an artist, a teacher, an activist, and well known in the community of Pacifica.
Yeah, I have a couple different of these, rolling tables. One for oil paints. There's one back in the corner there for acrylics, because I change mediums pretty often between the oils and acrylics and mixed media.
Have you always worked in oils and acrylics?
I first learned with oils when I had those private lessons. Those were in oils, and then later on started experimenting with acrylics because it's so great for certain kinds of mixed media. Acrylics are, you can pour them and splash them and do big splashy things with the acrylics. Oils are, I find, really wonderful for the more, like that self-portrait of mine on the door over there, for more realistic, kind of representations and things like that. So they each have their qualities, and I love them both.
Andrew, welcome to Footprints of Pacifica.
Thanks. Happy to be in my studio.
It's a great place.
Yeah.
How did you get actually connected with the art community here in Pacifica?
Well, working at the Tribune was a good start because, there were articles about the Art Guild of Pacifica and what they were doing, and, various, creative, interesting people. There was always articles about that. So, in pasting up the paper, I get to read about them. But probably more to the point was when I come to any place where I've always, a new place to live, I'd find a place to live, but almost immediately would look for a studio, because I always had a studio in my adult life, and it seems like a need as much as any other thing, So I started looking for a studio right away, and I happened to, my parents were living, of course, here in Pacifica too, and my mom, my first week here in town, my mom was kind of showing me around, and took me to where she was, shopping for groceries, which was this co-op on Palmetto called the Amused Carrot.
Oh yes.
And just my kind of place really, and in that co-op, people who belonged to the co-op would take turns working behind the counter, and on that day there was a young woman behind the counter, and her name was Nancy Hall.
Nancy Hall.
And so that's how I very first met Nancy, and she was, I was telling her about, I was looking for a studio. I'd already found an apartment, but I needed a studio, and she said, well, you should talk to the superintendent of the, elementary school district.
And who was that at that
That
time?
was Mel Lopez,
right.
yeah. And so I spoke to him and told him that, I'd had experience working with children, teaching art in the schools, because the deal is there was this empty school here that the school district had, and there was just a couple artists, only a few rooms that, might be considered habitable enough, because it was a pretty rundown building. But there was a few artists that were doing that program already called the Schools with Artists program, SWAP, Schools with Artists program. And so Nancy Hall was in that program, as was Sheila Gamble and Mary Harris. And he said, well, if you can find some space down there, and we'll set you up, and you could bring art into the other classrooms in the other schools that were still open in Pacifica in return for that studio space. That sounded like a great deal to me. And so I went down there, and the rooms really weren't in very good shape. But Mary Harris was really sweet and said I could share one of the classrooms with her. And so for 10 years I shared a studio with Mary Harris, and we taught art in the other 6 schools in the school district. 6 or 7 schools were still open at that time. And learned a lot from Mary Harris about that, of course, because she was a retired elementary school teacher herself, and was just wonderful with the children. And so it was a really great arrangement, though this building was a little scary. I would drive down here at night, and I would shine my headlights on the door of the studio and go in and unlock it, from the outside, and go in, and then go out and turn my lights off, because there was no lights down here at all around the building. It was just kind of dark.
Than what it is today.
Oh yeah. It was, and some windows would get broken in occasionally, and this whole wing that we're in right now was completely boarded up. No one ever even looked in here. We didn't know what was inside this whole wing. We were in the other wing there. In let's see, I guess it would be 1993, 94, the city decided to purchase this building from the school district. And so we thought, what's that mean for us? Because we're teaching art. And they allowed the program to continue on for a while. We kept teaching art in the schools and keeping our studio, but the city was buying this building, and so that didn't really benefit the city directly. So I knew our days might be numbered in our little studios over there. So in real early by 1990, late 1995 or early 1996, I decided to approach the city and ask them what their plans were with this building. And they said, well, there's this company that wants to store carpets, and we're thinking we might rent it out to them. And I'm going, oh my gosh, that doesn't sound very good for us. And it turned out the carpet thing completely fell through. I later heard from a city employee that, well, they came and looked at it, and no heat here, damp, those carpets would have been moldy and no time flat. And so by this time I started, drawing up some ideas for business plans of what if, we expanded what we were doing already. We had 2 studios here. What if we rented out all of these classrooms to artists? That would generate a little bit of money. We could start fixing up the building. I didn't have it quite figured out. I sat down with my dad, my dad, Nick Leone. He, had sold insurance for a lot of years and investment policies and knew a lot about business. So I sat down with him, and we tried to get flesh out this idea, at least how the money part of it would work, and how much of the money should the center keep, how much, if we're going to have to do all the maintenance, give some of that money to the city. So we worked up a plan, and gave the idea to the city manager. Charlie English was the city manager at the time, and I was kind of doing all of this through Larry Beaver. He was kind of our inside kind of friend within the city. He was the deputy director of public works.
Give his what Larry was.
Deputy director of public works, and for some reason he just had a real soft spot for the arts, and we got to be friends through working together on the tree issues. Ballymar had all these big tree issues, and
at this time you were living in Ballymar.
Yes, by this time I'd actually moved in with Nancy Hall. We got to know each other over the years after I got a studio here.
Relationship developed from that first encounter.
It did, yeah. And we were living together in Ballymar, and we started a tree planting group to try to address some of the problems, because they were having all these trees they had to cut down in Ballymar, and so this is, I realized this was an important thing, because this is how I first got noticed by the city of Pacifica. They knew who I was. I wasn't an unknown entity just coming up with an idea for an art center. They knew me because, and that's really how I got to know Larry Beaver. And we started off almost as adversaries because, the city wanted to cut down these trees, and we were like practically, roping ourselves to these trees until we learned that, a lot of them really did have to come down. Once we learned that, we go, okay, but some have to be replanted, but the city didn't have the resources for that, so we started the Valleymar Conservators, a tree planting group, which is still going right now, and but Nancy and I founded that group, and there's a big success story in some ways, a win-win for both the city and the community. And we did a big parade and raised a lot of money to plant trees. The parade was a really neat thing. There was like stilt walkers and masks and everything. So we were combining some of our art background with our activist background. And so all of this, I think, positioned us. So when we went to the city,
They had a sense of...
The sense of who we are. But they did say, we'd really feel more comfortable if we were going to actually get to the point and engage in a lease with you, since you're just an individual, and the 30 or so artists that I had contacted to move into here were such a newly formed group. The city felt they'd be more comfortable if also involved in this project was an art group that they, was maybe more long-standing in Pacifica, which I thought was an excellent suggestion. And so I approached the Art Guild of Pacifica and said, well, we're right in the beginnings, the very beginnings of our negotiations with the city of Pacifica for this building. Would you like to join in with us? And, it would be the home of all of these artists who would have studios, but it could also be the home of the Art Guild. I mean, the place is big enough for everybody, really. And they were totally open to the idea and jumped on board. And so then it was, early on it was just, all of these potential studio artists, 30 people that actually wrote out checks, because I said, actually write a check for what I think the rent will be, because we have to convince the council members that this is for real. And if I hold up 30 checks, because they weren't even sure artists, I could rent out all the rooms.
And who were some of the key players with the Art Guild who then ended up working with you?
Patty Jones was the president. I think she might have been president at that time of the Art Guild. So she was the person, I first sat down and talked with and was really supportive. There was, a lot of, Debbie Gretsch, I think, might have been, and was really active in the Guild then. Marion Yap, all of these, there was a number of different people who were, active in the Guild at that time. They'd been an organization already around for about 25, 30 years at that time. And so they had a history already. And so it was, I think for the Guild was a big step. They just didn't have a real home that they could call their own. So that was pretty exciting for a group like that to have a home base.
So then you had the Art Guild coming in, and then you had the Sanchez Art Center. So in effect, there are two organizations, but yet they are like of a family.
Sister, brother. They were, the sister organizations is what they were. And because we were a bit naive, we didn't always get our paperwork and contracts between the groups worked out too carefully, and that led to friction later. We definitely went through a sort of growing pain period where there was a real rift between the two parties. But that's since been ironed out, and lawyers, you always got to call in lawyers at some point.
They came in California, right?
Yeah. But they helped us get the paperwork right, and now there is a master agreement between the two organizations on who's responsible for what and how the two organizations are to interact down here. And since we've had that document, there's never been even the least bit of trouble, and I wish I'd known all that stuff, but I was an artist. I had been involved in starting other art groups like this one in Canada, but never anything on this scale that took off so. I mean, those first years were pretty heady in that, you know, we were in the Chronicle, you know, rags to riches stories of, you know, this a dilapidated art center becoming the jewel of the coast side, and you know, it was all this big deal. And I think when there's that much success that quick, you know, that sometimes makes it so you don't get all your, you know, I's dotted and your T's crossed and all the paperwork done. And we were learning as we went along. I was the director for the first 5 years, the executive director. And you know, I'd never really done a true administrative position, and that's what it became after a few years of success. But I did have a bit of a knack for the grant writing, fortunately.
That was one of my next questions, funding.
Yeah, we needed money, but we probably more than money even, we needed a lot of people to come down and help start to rehabilitate this building, which was in such bad shape, and it's pretty big. I mean, there's about 17, 18 classrooms. There's the old library, which has become the main gallery. There's these two wings, and in each wing there are these wide corridors that just called out to become galleries themselves. So we have the West Wing Gallery, the East Wing Gallery, and the main gallery. So 3 galleries, a riches of gallery space. And of course the concert hall, and I've kind of left behind telling about that, but after the first year of getting started, moving in here, which was, you know, that was dicey too, moving in. That was October of 1996. And in September of 1996, there was a city council meeting. You know, the city had to really make up their mind whether they were going to just trust a bunch of artists and a little art guild to move in and take over this building that they were buying. Because the original plan was to tear the building down and make a sports complex, which was a wonderful vision. And I know some of the people that were, you know, part of that vision, like Horace Hinshaw and folks like that. But they even came to realize the cost to tear this building down was so formidable, it turned out, that that probably was never going to happen. And so the city was, in a way, they were kind of in a bind. Their original plan for buying the building had fallen through. And so they didn't really know what to do with the building. And, you know, carpet people weren't going to rent it. And they were just scratching heads. So the timing was very fortunate. I don't think in many cities, and we've had other cities visit us and ask us, how did you do this? And when I tell them the story, they just go, wow, you were lucky. Your timing was lucky. So many fortunate things came together for a city to agree to let, you know, some artists with no money move in here and give them a chance, especially when some folks looked at the building and said, no, it's too far gone. You can't really bring this building back to life. It's not recyclable. But we just said, no, we can do this. And so at that council meeting, I remember there was a very close vote. It ended up being a 3-2 vote to allow us to move in the next month. And I mean, really needed to move in before the rains came because this building was leaking like a sieve. And we had to raise enough money from the rents of the studios right away to just get on the phone and get somebody out here to do the tar and gravel start patching things up. But they, you know, they said, you know, this is like a sieve. When we patch a few holes here, it starts leaking over here. And they said, you're going to have to raise some big money. And so, you know, I got on the phone to the David and Lucille Packard Foundation and other, you know, funders that are, you know, a key to this San Mateo area. And I have to say the David and Lucille Packard Foundation really came to our aid. And you know, and I really respect that foundation because they saw what, you know, they really heard us when we said what
the vision saw your vision.
They saw the vision. They saw that it was a need in this area, and they funded us at a time, and actually continue to fund us to this day with some areas, and it's a really great thing. But yeah, we were able, through some of their funding and of course raising money from the public and everything, to get new roofs on all of these buildings, not just the buildings that, the roofs that are on top of the galleries and the studios, but on top of every part of the buildings here, the concert hall and all the other buildings that are here.
When the decision was made, it was that was the time that it was the all-woman city council.
Yeah.
Some of those members were.
Well, Vigatelli was on that council, I believe, and Barbara Carr, and it was interesting. It was a 3-2 vote, and Larry Beaver was there, and I was up at the staff table. That was nice. They invited me to sit at the staff table so that council members, if they had questions, and and that's when I started making promises, because I was getting worried about the vote. I said, oh yeah, we'll put a new roof on there, we'll do on this. And later I thought, what was I thinking? How are we going to do all this, But Larry was real worried. He thought it was going to go the other way. And I remember when the public had their input, because they always allow the public to make comments before the council votes. My father was in the audience, and he got up and spoke at the podium, and he's Italian, and he got a little bit loud and said, you can't pass up this opportunity, and let these artists move in. They've offered to do this and this, and I thought, oh, God, I think he's maybe overdoing it. But later, Vigatelli, one of the council members, came up to me and said, I was really leaning towards voting against, and she was kind of our swing vote there. And she said, but I voted for it after I heard your father speak with such pride about you, and it was really the family thing that got moved by. And so I thanked her profusely, and really the city of Pacifica, I'm really thankful, because they did take a chance. Nobody knew what was really going to happen when all these artists moved into this torn up building. It needed painting, it needed patching, and nobody knew how it was going to go.
And just to jump forward for a moment, but then we're going to go back. They took a chance, and then recently there was a meeting at the city council where there was a vote as to continue your lease.
Yes.
So you comment on that real quickly, because that was...
Well, that was a unanimous vote, and that just did my heart so good, because to hear the council members speak then, it was, after, 14 years or something, and with such glowing terms, and they did research of other art centers, and whenever they called other cities, the city said, oh, Sanchez Art Center? We've heard all about it, and they would just rave about the art center. So the council members were hearing all of this, positive feedback about Pacifica from these other cities just when they started doing a little research.
Your original mission then for the Sanchez Art Center was what?
Well, we, after we had moved in here, we didn't really have a mission statement. We got together and realized for this to work with the Art Guild and the artists and the community, is we had to get together and do some workshops and build like a shared vision. And out of that came, creating community through art, building community through art, and that became our mission statement. We realized that we're so fortunate to be here, that this art center really has to be the community's art center. It's not a club for a group of artists. We're here to, help bring art to everybody. And have this true belief that this creative spirit is an important part of everyone's lives, and in any way we can further that is our goal.
And the mural, I think, illustrates that, and comment on the mural that we have in front of the building.
Yeah, so we were in this building, and we were really worried that the city may not even finish purchasing it from the school district, because it was the city was going to have to come up with extra money, and so it was still dicey the first year or two that we were here that this would ever be a long-lasting art center. And a few people on our board of directors at that time said, we need to make our mark on this building, so if they do feel they have to tear it down someday or kick us out, we'll have at least made a mark on it. And so I started doing sketches for a mural, and came up with an idea and presented that to the board here, and they liked it, because it was about that spirit of building community through art. And then it had to go. The idea for the mural had to go to the Parks, Beach, and Recreation, to the planning. So we went to all of those commissions with sketches and drawings, and there was a lot of input, of course, from people here at the Art Center. So I'd made changes based on all this input, and came up with a kind of a version. I mean, it's an 80-foot long wall out there. It's really big, and it's about 18 foot high. So I ended up doing a gouache painting that was 80 inches long and 18 inches high. So it was to scale, in color. And that kind of made it so that we could, scale it off and scale it up onto the wall out there. And I, pre-mixed a lot of the colors here in the studio. But at that point, you could just hand colors and brushes to people. They could look at the cartoon and begin painting on it. And it really turned from a project that I, maybe did some sketches in here and working with other people's ideas. It turned into this community project that dozens of people, dozens of people, probably 40, 50 people came down. Because, people would just drive by on the boulevard. One lady drove by and her daughter just was really fascinated, and they just parked in the parking lot, and I just gave them paint, and so anybody could kind of join in, and they didn't have to even be an artist. So for me, that really illustrated what, was a good illustration of how the Art Center was going to be. It was going to include everybody.
Exemplifying your mission statement, because it was of the community.
Yeah.
What is your vision, or what do you see as the future for the Sanchez Art Center?
Well, that's a good question. I think, as our community changes and grows, the Art Center, if we're going to really stick to our mission, building community through art, we have to constantly be open to new ideas and new people coming in. So the future of the Art Center really depends on the folks out there and what their ideas are. Like recently we've had folks from the Pacifica Land Trust and the Coastal Land Trust come up with an idea. It's still in too earliest stages, and I should maybe even speak about it, but it's exciting to me because it's this group we didn't know about coming to us saying, we have an idea, we have these lands, especially down in the coast side there, that have never been open to the public. And we want to allow artists in there now to come in and do artwork of these kind of almost like forbidden, hidden areas of land, and then have an exhibit of that here at the center. So people just keep coming with new ideas, and that's what keeps the center vibrant and fresh.
Well, that is just, it's so exciting. And Andrew, I want to thank you so much for being a guest on Footprints of Pacifica.
Thanks.
It's been so informative, and I think we could have probably about 10 shows with all the information that we have and the potential conversations we could have. So thank you so much.
My pleasure to be here.
Wow. Well, you're welcome. You're welcome. It was a pleasure having Andrew Leone on as our guest on Footprints of Pacifica. And as the late Frank Winston would say as he closed all of his shows, lives of great men remind us as we make our lives sublime, and departing leave behind us footprints in the sands of time.